So, in India, a significant number of children with neurodevelopmental differences, such as autism, ADHD, learning disability, often remain misunderstood or unidentified, which is largely due to limited awareness, stigma, and around how diverse brain functions actually look in everyday life. And this brings us to an important question. What if we often label these difficult behaviors as actually just a different way of thinking, sensing, and experiencing the world? And on that note, I welcome everyone to yet another webinar series by Psyuni. We are glad to have you all here today for the session on understanding neurodiversity, embracing different ways of thinking. And with today we have Ms. Bipasha Sharma and RCI certified rehabilitation counselor and a co-founder of Manovriksha Counseling Center. Her work is deeply rooted in the field of neurodiversity, where she focuses on affirming and strength-based practices with neurodivergent children and their families. Her work includes play therapy, developmental assessments, parent-mediated intervention with strong emphasis on sensory informed care and emotional attunement, helping families build deeper understanding and connection with their children. We are truly grateful to have you with us, ma'am, today, and we'll explore neurodiversity beyond label and move towards acceptance, inclusion, and needs. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Ashi, and hello everyone who's watching this. I'm very grateful to be here with you all and to explore this topic that is not only just clinically relevant right now, but also deeply human neurodiversity. And I would like to begin by inviting you with a little question. And so I want to know if you've ever approached, a situation in a way that feels completely natural to you, but confusing to everyone else around you, and somehow incorrect the way you behave and the way you talk. And for example, let's think of this activity. Okay, I think I'll assume most of the people watching this webinar would be right-handed. So if I ask you like, let's today only work with our left hand, and I would go on to say, okay, let's draw the word neurodiversity up in the air with your left hand. And while you do that, I will you will notice something very different, that yes, you can do it perhaps, but it becomes sort of, you might flutter while doing it. It might cause a little bit of more cognitive strain. And now I tell you that you have to do this for the rest of your day and for the rest of your life. You know, you might do it, but there will come a time where at 2 p.m. in the middle of the day, you're just burdened, you're feeling overwhelmed, and that's just not how you work. And this that moment where differences become visible is where our discussion begins on neurodiversity. And what we often interpret as difficulty, deviation, dysfunction, distress, the 4Ds, we can as well reflect on, diversity of how human minds are structured and they function differently. So with that, I will come on to my a few examples from my therapy room, and it was recently when a girl walked in, and I was taking the case history, and she looked at me and attended me for a few seconds, and then there was a strand of hair on her sweater, and then she kept looking. In another case, there was another client that came in, and they just didn't sit. They kept walking back and forth in the room, asking me the same question over and over again. And somehow they were very curious, but at the same time, I, as a psychologist, I might write on my notes difficulty in interaction. I might see sensory concerns, but what I might call, or what the society calls as deficits. Rather, these two cases were very neurobiologically different ways of processing the world around us. So, we have often come from a medical model where we have a norm group. Okay, and I consider myself as a neurotypical person. That means the average way how every other brain is like in the environment, and so we're coming from a very pathological paradigm which says there's a normal way in which the humans would function, and anything that strays away from that normal is a disorder, is a deficit. And that's where DSM and ICD comes into play, and we give a diagnosis and we label that as a disorder. And then we spend the entire life working on an intervention and making them uh, become the norm group, to communicate in exactly the same ways as others are doing, expecting them to be sensory, on a sensory level, be the same. And to me, even though when I read it in theory as a student, it all made sense. But when I came to the reality and saw these people in real life, I realized there are so many neurological differences that I'm just not attending to. It's not that these are behavioral choices of them wanting to do this. That girl who came in didn't, it doesn't mean that she didn't want to listen to me or listen or answer the questions I was asking her during the case history, but it's because maybe the color and the sensation, they were very different. For the child who came in, who was rocking back and forth, maybe he was so sensorily overwhelmed that he just could not attend to me, and what was important during that time was actually regulation. So maybe the reason why they're fidgeting, the reason why they're stimming, is because they're trying to regulate. To me, I couldn't hear the hums of the fan, and maybe they hear it much more than I do. And now I'm expecting them to function in exactly the same way that I do. That sounds very unfair. And that's where the medical model shifted to a neurodiversity paradigm. And that's where we have started to now move, make this shift and acknowledge that there are neurological differences that are natural variations of the human genome. So, what does the neurodiversity paradigm talk about? So, there are three fundamental principles here. Firstly, we understand that neurodiversity is very natural and is a very valuable form of human diversity. So, there are actually infinite variations of this genome. The way we will cognitively look at the world within our species, and we can it's impossible that all will function in the exact same way and would process the world in the exact same way. Even you listening to this right now would be very different from the way that I see the world. So it's very unfair for honestly you to behave exactly like me and for you to speak like me, make very non-verbal gestures like me. These will all be different. So the idea of a single normal and a right brain is culturally constructed fiction, which no longer is valid more than the idea of like a right ethnicity or like a right gender. Gender has become very fluid, and so has neurodiversity. So, and lastly, social dynamics regarding neurodiversity mirror other forms of diversity, including inequalities of power and creative potential that arises when diversity is embraced. So I want to, before I jump more into it, I want to clarify a few terminologies that are now out there. And it would be important and also a little bit informed about how people are now referring to how people view neurodiversity now. And so we'll start with the word neurotypical actually. The first word I referred to was basically how a typical person is expected to behave. This is a normative group. That means most of us behave in that way in the society. Uh, that's called neurotypical. A neurodivergent person, a person whose brain is slightly different from the socially constructed standard of normal or average, especially in areas like the way we think and the way we sense the world through our five senses, how we communicate to other people verbally and non-verbally, and how we socialize with other people. This can include people with conditions that vary from, autism, ADHD, even other neurodevelopmental concerns, which we will get onto later. Then the word neurodiversity. This is very important because I kind of relate it with the word biodiversity. And when I say biodiversity, you know that there is a variety of living organisms in our environment, and they all exist within an ecosystem. Just like if I ask you the question, are you a part of neurodiversity? Yes, because you have different ways and different cognitive functionality. But at the same time, if I say, are you neurodivergent? You may and may not be. So, a person with ADHD, for example, or autism, for example, would be on the neurodivergent. But even a neurotypical person can be considered as somebody belonging to the neurodiversity, synonymous to being on the biodiversity. Uh, there are a few other terms going on, like neurotype. This is a simple way of describing just the brain style of somebody. Um, and when it comes to neurodiversity, there are a lot of conditions that fall under it, and most of them are developmental disabilities, which have been mentioned by the DSM and ICD, like ASD and ADHD, pervasive developmental concerns, and sensory processing concerns, SLD, specific learning disabilities like dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia. There's also tic disorders and Tourette's, intellectual disabilities, Down syndrome. And there is recent research that also shows that even OCD and anxiety and panic disorders can be considered under the neurodiversity as well, because they do show differences in brain functioning. So, if I talk about the classification in a very broad sense, I've taken this from um, Doyle in a 2020 study, and this talks about various areas of classification. There is a neurodevelopmental area, which I've already spoken about. This is a specific domains with no health implications per se, such as learning disabilities. And then there is a clinical area which talks about differences in behavior and communication patterns, just like ADHD and autism. Then there's a neurological aspect as well. So these will be changes that have happened due to an illness or an injury, such as amnesia and aphasia. And there is a segment of a psychiatric aspect as well, which talks about conditions that impact the mood, perception, and behavior of people. So this can be schizophrenia and depression. So I have already talked about this a little bit, and I like comparing it with neurodiversity. And there is a small diagram I have shared here to help simplify this. So, on the wider whole, we all fall under neurodiversity. There is a certain population of people that fall in the end of the bell curve, and these are the minorities, also called neurodivergent here. So these are people like people who ADHD, or people with ADHD, and autistic people. And there's another segment that is us, people who are on the average, fall in the middle of the bell curve, neurotypical people. So I'm going to talk about a few common conditions um, in the neurodiversity. A few neurodivergent people who are higher in prevalence. So, because this is more widely known, so I'll go through those first, and then if we have any specific questions, I can probably elaborate on others. Um, so we'll start with ADHD, and this is the first case that I had focused on during the beginning of this video. And ADHD is characterized by sustained patterns of inattention, hyperactivity, impulsivity, leading to certain challenges in maintaining attention and managing behavior. So when that girl was staring at one hair strand on her sweater, um, she was hyper fixated on one object, and it was difficult for her to regulate during that time. The second case that I talked about was ASD, autism spectrum disorder. And these are basically differences in human interaction and communication and nonverbal communication that are seen with people. So, oftentimes, the DSM categorizes this as two separate things: restricted and repetitive behaviors, and deficits in social interaction and communication. Both, when structurally seen, both ADHD and ASD actually exhibit comorbidity and share overall very similar neurological and genetic pathways. And we have seen that about 50% to 70% of it is determined by genetics. So that is a lot, and that also tells us that it's very prevalent in our environment. Um, and dyslexia, which is regarded as a learning difficulty. And there are other difficulties as well that we talked about, such as dyscalculia, which is difficulty in mathematical processing, and dysgraphia in writing. In dyslexia, there is a challenge with phonological processing, basically, rather than it being a problem with regard to your intellectual ability or hearing deficits. Then, lastly, we all know about OCD as well, obsessive compulsive disorder. Even though it's a psychiatric disorder, it overlaps socially and neurologically with autism and ADHD. And it's very interesting because these are new research that is coming out, and it's not only OCD, but rather other psychiatric disorders such as panic disorder and a few personality disorders as well. So, when we talk about neurobiology, as I've told you, it's just not behavioral. It was not that girl's choice to not listen to me. It was not that that boy's choice to rock back and forth and to engage in stimming. Um, it's a very structural way in which our brain is actually different from theirs. And it's something that these are behaviors often used as coping strategies. It can be used when somebody is feeling the need of regulation, they're feeling anxious, overwhelmed, need any sensory input. This can also be because of, even sometimes boredom, but oftentimes it's not. Then there are dopamine pathways. So, for example, dopamine is basically a motivation center that also is called the reward center. And the ways in which dopamine is working in most of these neurodivergent conditions is very different from how ours is working. So, when it comes to culture and advocacy, we are now moving and making a shift to identity first language. And that helps us understand equality better in our environment. So I wouldn't, for example, say this individual with autism unless they want me to say that. We have now moved to a language that makes their identity comes first, such as an autistic person or an ADHDer. So visualize probably when I say the word person with autism, it almost seems like they have this bag in their hands and this baggage that they're carrying with them. That this is a person and I have an accessory called ADHD or autism, and we want to acknowledge and honor their identity here instead of making this a burden that they have to stay with. That's why we're now moving towards an identity first language. And lastly, now we're moving towards a social model as well, where we understand that disability is often a mismatch between the brain and the environment. So, the first example that I gave you about, writing with your non-dominant hand, that itself, um, you know, if you're if the way we are living in this world and we are told that will not be accepted or be successful or be competent if we can't do it with our dominant hand at all. I mean, anybody would be exhausted. And many times a lot of children that come to me often feel the pressure from the society rather than the disability. Um, and it's not the label that pushes them down. It's often the society not understanding them, being ignorant, not having enough knowledge about it. And this is about teachers, this is about peer circles in school, this is about workers at your office. So when we don't understand what neurodiversity is, it's very difficult to understand the other person and their needs. So even just understanding and acknowledging it, providing them a safe place, can help a lot. Now, I've seen in a lot of places we are still using a very medical model when it comes to diagnosis. For people, diagnosis is often helpful to understand themselves, to understand the treatment. However, um, I remember the last parent that came in with this receipt of having this label of autism for their child, and they were in denial, they were in shock, and they just didn't know because in the entire receipt, entire prescription, what was written was, difficulties in attending to the environment and not attuned, um, is not able to make eye contact. It's So when all these things were written, the parent felt even more demotivated. But there is another alternative to deal with this actually, and that is a strength based model. So, describing the individual in terms of strengths and the supports they need instead helps not only the individual but also changes the way now we are providing support to them as a society. And a lot of times, this support can come from any one of us. This does not require any special tools and tricks or, any higher level education to be a psychologist or a medical health professional. So these can be small changes like, providing fidget toys, having sensory rooms, and maybe some amount of sensory support as well, recognizing that other sensory needs can be different than ours, and the ways of behaving can also be different, whether it be verbal communication or through non-verbal communication. Changes in the way that teachers now integrate these children in the classroom can also be different by including things like body doubling, and wherein you can have another partner with you to work alongside, to help with attention and to work in collaboration to perceive support in the environment. So we also want to acknowledge differences, or vulnerabilities, rather than calling them as deficits, weaknesses, and impairments. And most importantly, everyone who is neurodivergent is already feeling excluded, is feeling pressured, burdened, and there are enormous studies that show that most of the time there are comorbidities that are coming up, such as anxiety and depression, that do not happen because of the concerns that they're dealing with, but rather how the society is treating them. And they feel the need to now mask to be able to fit in with everyone, to behave in a certain way that everybody else is behaving. And this is especially seen with a lot of females on on the neurodiversity. And they often mask and hide their stimming and suppress it in order to fit in with everyone. But at the end of the day, they end up feeling worse. They're not regulated, and it shows up with a lot of anxiety and depression, feeling like they've just not fit in with everyone. So that is mostly about neurodiversity and a few tools. And I am willing to take up any questions that might be coming up, or any other things that you might want to ask me. So that's about it. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So, ma'am, since talking about Indian families, the stigma around how stigma impacts early intervention and identification to help them support the children with neurodivergent. How does that come into play when you are looking for parents who are uh, maybe having so much of uh, bias towards their own children?
Absolutely. This is such a relevant question because this shows up in my center all the time. And there are a lot of parents that are firstly, they're in a state of shock, they're in a state of denial, they just don't understand what the child is going through. And it can be very difficult to know that your child is now different than everyone else. And maybe one of the things that's also communicated is that it stays, there's no medication for it, there's only intervention. And go in for a behavioral intervention or a social intervention, go for skills training, and um, these are pretty pervasive. So I think instead of diagnosing children very early on, I think early intervention can even be started by picking up on certain symptoms, and understanding that their needs are particularly very different than other children. So early intervention can start at any point, but this would mean that parents actually need to be educated first and need to be intervened before the child. And in a lot of times in my sessions, I actually work with parents and make them understand what needs does the child and what function does their behavior have. So, for example, if a parent is coming to me that the child is very aggressive, I might actually, instead of working with the aggression itself, I might tell them that, okay, let's look at the function of aggression first. What are they trying to communicate to you? Is it a sensory need? Are they feeling overwhelmed? Or is it because they just are not able to communicate to you how they're feeling? So instead of now focusing on a very behavioral strategy of reducing aggression, I might now focus on, for example, communication strategies that can help the child and help the parent communicate better. So, in that way, the aggression obviously, when the function is addressed, the behavior also is addressed. So, I would absolutely say that early intervention helps, or also parent mediated intervention helps. Um, I also would want to say that. Um, very early diagnosis and putting and throwing showing labels on children also sometimes stigmatizes the process of therapy. And that this is about my personal observations. Honestly, there are different ways different professionals approach this, but for me, I feel that education can come first. Oftentimes parents can be supported first, and then later by the age of 6 or 7, it's when all the paperwork and legal work can be done, where we're writing all the prescriptions and giving out diagnosis.
Yeah. So, thank you, ma'am. I think there are no more questions as such. So, it was very insightful and thought-provoking session. And for, I think we learned, and the parents could also get a key insight from the session that neurodiversity is not something that they can cure or fix, but it is how naturally variation in our brains, and that it's how our brain functions.
Yeah.
And this shift in perspective is incredibly very powerful. So, from moving beyond, like you mentioned, moving beyond from traditional deficit based use to more embracing a more strength based and affirmative approach, this session around neurodiversity has given us a lot to reflect on. And we especially appreciate how you also highlighted the importance of like seeing behavior in context and understanding the neurobiological differences, and how like creating environments that truly like supports individual rather than just trying to change them. And to all our viewers, thank you for being here and having an engaged and thoughtful session. And as we conclude, we hope that we encourage you to become more aware, accepting, and inclusive in your everyday interaction, and recognize that different ways of thinking are not just deficits, but a part of being human diversity. And thank you again for everyone joining. Uh, and we look forward
Thank you.
to seeing you in upcoming webinars and sessions.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful doing this.
Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.